For Shakespeare lovers, I'd say that Romeo and Juliet is here, and our story is literally right over here. Everything takes place after Romeo and Juliet's death. So it starts with them, and then it's basically about the Capulets and the Montagues coming together. In the original stories, we see the death of Romeo and Juliet as a kind of almost like a heightened moment for the families to join. But in this instance, the prince is bringing us together through a betrothal, which is a crazy idea, but because there's a war going on with the two families, it seems like that's the best thing to do. I play Rosalind Capulet, who is a strong, bold, determined young woman, way ahead of her time. She is the cousin of Juliet Capulet and the young lady that you would all know from the famous story as the girl that Romeo originally swoons over before he comes across Juliet. She's an orphan. Her parents died a few years ago, so her and her sister were then sent to the Capulet house to live with Lord and Lady Capulet and Juliet, and was made to become a servant, just stripped completely of who she was. She's in love with the Prince of Verona, has been since her teens, and when everything happens with Romeo and Juliet, when they die, the prince has a very difficult decision to make and decides to betroth her to Benvolio against her will. So she has this really difficult decision of if she should pursue her love with the prince or if she should not taint the Capulet name. Our show is, I think, going to be the barrier-breaking show. It's going to convey just how far we've come in the industry. We still have a long way to go, but just this example alone can show that we can have all sorts of ethnicities, all sorts of variations and shades and cultures in the one, and it doesn't need to be apologized for, it doesn't need to be explained. Our show just has a mix of people. I'm Black and Juliet's white and we're cousins, and it's not explained in the show. And I think that's absolutely brilliant. We don't need to apologize for anything, it just is what it is. Firstly, this isn't just a period piece, it's a modern period piece. The costumes have modern touches, the language isn't archaic at all, it's very modern, sometimes even colloquial. It's very relatable. It's Shakespeare. He wrote with these themes that you can translate through time. He wrote about love and passion and deceit and hate and family and war. All of these things are our through lines, and it makes you feel like you could be in any world. We have our own world. We're not presenting anything that is a certain part of history. We're just taking that part of history and making our own little twist. So there's a very young, fresh audience, a young, fresh cast as well. A lot of us have less experience than maybe the older characters, the older actors, and it's just a mix of different flares, I think. It's got a great style, great writing, great emotional moments and heightened moments, and a lot of drama, a lot. How sexy the men? Just that, how sexy are our men? Literally, we have people I think are gonna just hate Rosalind, hopefully not hate me, because we've got Wade Briggs, we've got Sterling Suleiman, who are probably two of the most gorgeous men that I've ever come across, and I get to work with them. So, crazy sexy. There's some really sexy scenes as well that I'm not part of, but I've seen, and I can't wait for you to see.
Prince Aeschylus is coming back to Verona. He's been gone for a while, and so even though he grew up with the Montagues and the Capulets and he knows the battle, he's not as prepared as he hopes he would be when he comes back and comes into power. So he's got to make a stand for himself and make his power known to both of the families. And right away, that is a struggle. And he also has to sacrifice a lot personally in order to rule Verona the way he wants to. Rosalind and Aeschylus grew up together, and they were in love. And they've both had to go their separate ways and make personal sacrifices just to move forward. And at the beginning of this story, it's the first time they've seen each other in a long time. And so between all the other things Aeschylus and Rosalind have to juggle, they also have to juggle meeting each other again and seeing where that can lead. Aeschylus is a young prince, and these are two powerful families who feel like they should be in control of the city. So they cater to him, but they're trying to manipulate him. And so he always has to keep them at bay. And the one person in my camp is my sister, the Princess Isabella. And she has been in the city. She has been there the whole time that I've been gone. So like I kind of look to her to help me navigate what these people are really doing. Because it's all manipulation, it's all power struggle. One of the first shows that I saw from beginning through was Grey's Anatomy. And I mean, it was amazing. Of course, like, I feel like it kind of changed television a bit. And then I've watched all her other shows, Private Practice, How to Get Away with Murder. I haven't watched The Catch yet, just because of the timing with coming out here for this show. Scandal, of course. I think I binge watched Scandal one day when I was sick, and I was like, what? I was in that mindset where I was like, this show's for girls. And then like someone put it on and I was just like, never mind, it's for me. I'm watching all of it. Our show is really sexy, really beautiful. I mean, the few things I've seen, it's just gorgeous. And of course, there's just a lot of passion and intrigue and love and all those things. So I think people will be turned on.
The premise of the show is we pick up after the death of Romeo and Juliet, so based on Shakespeare's famous play Romeo and Juliet, and we follow the houses of Montague and Capulet in the aftermath of Romeo and Juliet's death. So we have to see every other character that was involved in the original play deal with the loss of children or their cousins or their siblings or whoever they are in relationship to Romeo and Juliet. And we watch the House of Montague and the House of Capulet try to survive one another in Verona. We watch the Prince of Verona, Aeschylus, try and manage the families, try to keep peace after such a tragic event. And yeah, so it's full of politics, it's full of power play, it's full of love and passion and romance and sword fighting, which is a good part of any television show. I play Benvolio Montague, who is Romeo's cousin and the nephew of Lord Montague, who was the head of the Montague house. After the death of Romeo, Benvolio is alone, essentially, in the world. He has a very strained, very unhealthy relationship with his uncle. He was an orphan from a young age and he was taken in by his uncle. So he grew up alongside Romeo, who became his best friend. But the death of Romeo, the death of Mercutio, another one of his friends who dies in Shakespeare's original play, means that he's left in the world with nothing, essentially, except the responsibility to be the heir to a house he has no interest in being part of. You could call Benvolio the outcast of the show, I think. He rebels against all that he should do, all that comes with the responsibility of being a Montague. He rebels against the wealth of his house. He rebels against the kind of expected behavior of his class and of the family he's a part of. And after the death of Romeo and after the death of Juliet, he is left to try and figure out how he's really going to be here at all. And it's only through the forced marriage to a Capulet, Rosalind, who's the protagonist of our show, that he's forced, whether he likes it or not, to form a connection with her. And that's kind of where his story really begins, in a sense. As soon as he's bound to Rosalind, that's when things get interesting. I read it, and having studied Shakespeare, having performed in Shakespeare in the theatre, I'm well enough versed to appreciate how well they'd taken Shakespeare's play and contemporized it for an audience. The language is incredibly accessible. There's nothing Shakespearean about the language. They've retained all of the themes that are obviously themes that are still relevant to today. And they've given it, and I think this is Shondaland's obviously Shondaland's doing is they've given it a kind of contemporary, attractive, dynamic, energetic kind of quality, which hooked me in when I read the script, and obviously attracted a lot of other people too. The state of affairs in Verona after the death of Romeo and Juliet are as tense as ever. There is no one to blame for the death of the two children, so obviously that is a major issue for both families. They obviously blame one another. And until someone can be blamed, the tension between the families will continue. It means that Verona is a hostile place. It's a place where life and death are legitimate stakes. It's a place where you don't go to the Capulet side of town if you're a Montague and vice versa. It's a place where if you pick a fight, if you get into a fight, or if you injure or kill someone from the other family, you face execution. So it's definitely a world in which all of these characters, the stakes are as high as they can get. They are life and death, they are every day. And for all of us to find a place within that level of intensity is such a fantastic opportunity to present a group of characters, that being their starting point. And it only gets harder and harder for all of them to maintain some kind of balance or understanding or peace with one another. The one thing I really appreciate about what this show is doing, and I think it's definitely a Shondaland thing, and you know, I say it being at the moment victim number one of this, as in I'm definitely the person that's had to take his clothes off most so far in this television show. But it's great because the guys are taking their clothes off, and for two reasons. One, because how many shows in the world do we see where women are, you know, asked to take their clothes off for no good reason at all? But two, especially because the period of this show, the kind of the class system and the expectations of men and women were very different. It's great to see a television show where the blokes are getting their kits off and the women get to wear beautiful dresses and they're the ones that are watching. I think that's a healthy thing for the world we live in right now.
She is Prince Aeschylus' sister, who was sort of ruling in his absence while he was away in Venice, sort of learning his princely ways. And I spent, I think, more time with our father, who was the king, he's passed away right at the beginning of the show. But she sort of plays the little birdie on his shoulder, who's guiding him. I mean, she knows what's been going on in Verona, so she has some more insight. And so, you know, some might say she's actually more fit to rule than Aeschylus, but because she is a woman, you know, it's not very common for a woman to rule at that time, so she does what she can. Isabel at the start of the show is sort of briefing Aeschylus on the chaos in Verona between the Montagues and the Capulets. They're still fighting, and you know, it starts off with the death of Romeo and Juliet, so it's sort of, you know, we're just thrown into this craziness immediately, and so she's there to try and guide Aeschylus. When my friends ask me what the show is like that I'm working on, it's like I just do a little dance, because that's what it feels like. It's just, there's romance, there's drama, it's very politically charged, which I think is the most interesting part of the show, especially in the times right now and sort of the political temperature of the world right now. I think that's something that's really important about it, but also, you know, I'll send them a little pic of me in my costume, tell them not to show anybody, of course, but and they can't believe it. It's pretty dreamy. Living in Spain has been a dream. I've always wanted to live in Europe at a point in my life, and this opportunity just presented itself. It's 6 months in Spain. It's been great, and we travel around any chance we get. I mean, I grew up in LA, born and raised, so it's definitely, I mean, it's a historical dream every day, just walking through the city. I played a wonderful 3-episode character arc on a little show called The Catch, playing an Arabian princess, which is maybe a little bit closer to my actual origins, but you know, my mom always said I was a princess, so I guess it was meant to be.
The pilot starts with Romeo and Juliet at the height of their romance and their wedding. But we keep cutting to it. But we're also seeing what we didn't see within Shakespeare's play. We're seeing behind the scenes. We're seeing what's happening in the Capulet household, what's happening in the Montague household, and what's happening with Aeschylus and Isabella, and basically the world. We're introducing the world itself. He's a man who seems to have everything, and he's looking forwards to his daughter marrying Paris, Prince Paris from Padua. And everything's set up very nicely, and the only problem is he has a dysfunctional marriage, but otherwise, you know, his wife married him for his title and his money. She'll get over it. And then we have basically when the tragedy strikes, we see a man's world unravel very quickly. One of the reasons why it works so well in Shondaland is that it's basically all the stuff that Shonda's shows are based on, but it's like, you know, it's where murder kind of wasn't every day, but there were a lot of people killing each other, and it just fits in that world so well of intrigue and passion and power and ambition. All the things that, as I say, drive Shondaland shows, but just in a world that readily accepts it. One of the things that took my breath away when we first started this, the first read-through we had of the pilot, was quite astonishing. I mean, we have by and large, a young cast. Everybody gave their all, and it was so overpowering. It was so amazing, the emotion and the just the depth of people's characterization, right across the board. Not one weak link, not one person under-energized or just kind of phoning it in because they felt embarrassed. Just everybody on board. I've not often been that impressed. I'm always impressed by people around me, but literally, as I say, across the board, it's a young, experienced cast. I don't think I've ever seen a show like this on TV. It is so sumptuous and so beautiful. It's like a movie. Seriously, every episode is like a movie. It's epic. It's extraordinary. They chose to film it in Spain because there is this backdrop of the most beautiful medieval / Renaissance architecture. There are fortifications, there are palaces, there are cathedrals. When you are in a location that helps you be in the moment, it changes the way things are. It really helps. Being in a studio, it's your job as an actor to be in the moment if you're in front of a green screen. However, in this instance, there is very little green screen. There is mainly reality, and it's just, this place this isn't a set. This is real, and it's astonishingly beautiful. We shoot a few things. We shoot some of the palace here, some of the rooms, people's quarters, and there's a part of this that we shoot the crypt. And it's extraordinary that it really does change the way you perceive your world. It's, as I say, it's epic, stunning.
The pilot episode 1, is where we start at the end of Shakespeare's play. So we lose Romeo and Juliet in the pilot, in the first episode. And for Montague, this is his only son. This is the child he's put all his hopes and dreams into. This is the future of his house. And Romeo is a particularly attractive human being. He's a beautiful young man, you know, in every respect. And I think when Montague loses him, the centre gets cut out of his world. He's also a widower, and Romeo is the only vestige of his wife, and basically his entire history. His entire life gets wiped out with the death of Romeo. The whole premise of this pilot and this series is really dear to my heart in the sense that there's so many great stories in Shakespeare, and Romeo and Juliet is one of the great stories in Shakespeare. What Heather Mitchell and Shondaland have done with this story is they've found an incredibly new and creative way to incorporate more than one Shakespearean tale, more than one set of Shakespearean characters into the piece. And there's this fantastic device by which we see in the first series, and hopefully moving forward, various characters out of the Shakespeare canon come to life in the series. Shondaland's involvement in the production, them spearheading this production, I think has given it a lot of excitement. There's a lot of buzz around it. It's certainly meant that we haven't wanted for assets in terms of making the show. You know, we have these incredible costumes. We're shooting in Spain in 1,000-year-old cathedrals and monasteries and palaces and castles. I think as actors, we've all agreed that we have great confidence that the storytelling is going to be first rate. You know, one thing that all of Shonda's shows have in common is the plotting and the storytelling is unparalleled. They're wonderful, wonderful television productions to watch as an audience. This would have to be the most colourblind production I've ever seen, certainly I've ever been a part of. And we gathered in one room at the beginning and looked at each other and went, wow, you know, we are pretty much the rainbow. And it isn't explained in the script. It's not bowed to at all. And I think as a production, we made the decision across the board really early on, not even to bother to acknowledge it. We came up with our own family trees where we went, yeah, it's possible. It's all possible. Some of it might not be the most likely, familial kind of lines known to man, but it is all possible. And I think it makes things interesting because we're dealing with a time in human history. We're dealing with the age of Enlightenment and Renaissance, where these cities, especially the port towns, were full of every nationality, every type of person in the world. It was where the world first started to crack open and people really started to see the breadth of human experience. I think our cast reflects that. It's been an amazing evolution. Lost was the second job I got in the United States when I first got here, maybe 12 years ago. So it's very dear to my heart. And then Ugly Betty was where I really started to believe I'd found a home for myself here. And being a part of that production, being a part of ABC, being in New York shooting was, oh my goodness, this is America, this is being here, this is doing this job here. And this kind of is all of that come to fruition. I was a recurring on Betty, I'm a regular on this, and getting to be involved in an ABC production, especially a Shondaland production at ABC, from the pilot, from the get-go, is both a wonderful homecoming and kind of a step forward and a whole brand new adventure.
I play Count Paris, who is a noble from a neighboring city, the neighboring city of Mantua, and he has a special interest in Verona and in the conflict that's going on there. When I first read the script, it was just kind of, to be honest, it's Romeo and Juliet, and then Paris seems to kind of die. And I was like, okay, well, what does he do then? They're like, no. In this version, he lives, and he's mad, and he's not entirely motivated by revenge. He kind of had this idea before, but now he's really determined on seeing it through. So I thought it was a really cool script. I love the idea of taking side characters from Romeo and Juliet and making them the main players. And I like the sort of little nods to other things in Shakespeare's world as well. The cool thing about Shakespeare is that people have been doing it for centuries now, and it's public domain, and so you can do Shakespeare in space, you can do whatever you want. So it's cool to take the story that everybody knows and say, yeah, but then what happens? Because I guess in Shakespeare's time, when you had a play, you have to kind of wrap it up at the end, and you have to restore some kind of sense of order so that everybody realizes the world isn't going to end. But nowadays, it's like, but they're not going to suddenly get along. Like, you're not telling me everybody's happy now. You're not. So obviously, stuff comes after that. So I love the and then what. On the surface, it seems an odd fit for Shondaland, but I think that ultimately what you've got is a lot of the really kind of juicy stuff that we like to see. You've got love and backstabbing, but the stakes are really heightened in this because the fates of entire cities are at stake. So when you're dealing with royals, suddenly everybody's well-being is what's at stake. Just because it's a period drama doesn't mean that the themes aren't timeless. And I think we've always been fascinated by the activities of both the people that came before us and also maybe the dealings of noble families. And this show has both of those, but they're still going through really human things. So despite the stakes being huge, I think we can all recognize ourselves in these people.
Olivia is Rosalind's younger sister, and Livia and Rosalind were highborn daughters of House Capulet. So Lord Capulet's younger brother, who we don't get to meet because our parents both passed away before the story takes place, we're the two daughters of that house. Then our parents pass away and we become servants in Lord and Lady Capulet's house. So you meet them where Livia's very hopeful, very sort of content to be where she is. She wants to get married. She wants to move out of the house and have her own family, but she's not as upset or as resentful about her current circumstances as Rosalind is. And she sort of sees the bright side of everything. She sees it as, I'm gonna play my part, I'm gonna do what I need to do, and then love and happiness and family is on the other end of that. So she's kind of like the hopeful, young, bright character of the story. The sister relationship is just, it's fantastic and it's really fun to play. I mean, they have a lot of different ideas about pretty much everything that happens. From Rosalind getting betrothed, from Romeo and Juliet marrying in their little secret ceremony. They sort of have a different viewpoint about everything that happens, but they love each other so fiercely. And I think they know each other well enough to not take offense when they disagree. So it's a lot of fun to play with somebody that, and Rosalind's sort of the only character that Livia is equal footing with. So she can argue with her, she can challenge her, whereas everybody else, she's a little bit more demure. It's interesting to see the sort of parallels between Grey's scandal, murder, in terms of love triangles, in terms of fast-paced drama, in terms of, not Grey so much, but Scandal, especially in terms of politics and power struggles, and how quickly the storylines move, how heightened the drama is. I definitely feel like there's some parallels between that. And then there's certain like signatures, I don't want to give too much away, but there's certain signatures that you read the script and you're like, I've read this, like not this specifically, but I know that this is like gonna be a little treat for the Shondaland watchers because it'll be something a little familiar and a little gratifying, I think, if you've been following the other shows. It's based on a story that we're all familiar with, but it looks like today, it's accessible to anyone and everyone, number one. Number two, I think that the younger characters have agency in this show, right? So you have someone like the princess, who's not far in age from Ebony, right? But she has something to say, and she has a point of view, and she has something to contribute to what's happening in her town. You have someone like Rosalind, right, who's also not far in age from Ebony, real life actor, who's powerful and knows who she is and isn't going to be defined by the societal expectations of the time, which is another reason I think that millennials will connect to the show, is because the heroine is somebody, not just the heroine, but a lot of the younger characters in the show are people who are not willing to be told what to do. You know what I mean? They have their own dreams and their own aspirations, and they're a little rebellious. And I think our generation is a little rebellious. So I think all of that is going to be exciting. Oh my gosh, it's a little insane. It is a little insane. I remember when we all met each other, I kept having to apologize to them and be like, I'm not being creepy, but you're just beautiful. Like, we have a picture actually from the pilot of, I wish some of the other guys were here too, of Romeo, who's played by Lucien Laviscount, and the actors who are here playing Mercutio and Tybalt and the guards, and also Benvolio and the prince, and we have a picture of all of them lined up, and it's just like, whatever your preference is, you know, it's just like a platter of eye candy for you, so yeah, it's a pretty hot show.
I play Lady Capulet, Juliet's mother. And she basically is the matriarch of House Capulet. And in medieval times, the woman would listen to her husband. So Lady Capulet resorts to all sorts of interesting things to regain her power in the relationship dynamic. Juliet means everything to Lady Capulet. In a lot of ways, she's the light that Lady Capulet is not, and I think my character really understands that and wants to protect her as much as possible, so when she loses her daughter, it tears her down to the darkest place she could ever be. Shakespeare always, his general themes were always very relatable, and it was just the language that made it more challenging for us today to really understand. So, I mean, there are themes of unrequited love and power struggles, and we deal with politics in the show as well. The way the story is written, we really do depart from the original story quite a bit. Like at the end of the original story, the death of Romeo and Juliet heal both of the households. However, in our story, I think the rifts get bigger, and so there are definitely some differences, and I think they're really fun differences, and I'm excited to see where we're going to go. One of the beautiful things about the show is that there is colorblind casting, and you know, we're taking a really bizarre turn in the world today, and I think it's really important that this show is coming out when it's coming out, because at the end of the day, we're all human. We all have the same flesh and blood and different variations of skin color, but we're human, and we really shouldn't forget that.
I play Friar Lawrence, and I am responsible ultimately for marrying Romeo and Juliet, and in some ways creating this whole scenario on some levels. And it's a deed that was done with good intentions, but had some unforeseen and dangerous and complex ramifications, and has sort of plunged the city of Verona into a feud that it was meant to fix, but just added fuel to that particular fire. As we move past Romeo and Juliet's very unfortunate demise, Friar Lawrence still has a part to play in attempting to create peace in Verona. I think he is one of the pieces of the puzzle, and he has some allegiances essentially with both families. He's in quite a unique position in that although he can't give too much away, but let's just say he has connections to both families. So he's an interesting conduit for what will happen. It's very interesting being in this show. It's dealing with a sort of very well-known story, a classic story, but the themes that it's exploring are completely contemporary, ultimately. We've got a love story set in the middle of political machinations and families vying for power. And this situation exists today, all over the world. There's people fighting for control and power, and as an actor, it's really nice to be able to, on the one hand, set these modern day themes in a sort of oldie worldy situation and still be exploring something that's really relevant today. We just get to wear different clothes and speak in a slightly different way, but the themes are relevant to what's happening in the world today. In terms of scale, this production is very similar to Game of Thrones, which I was lucky enough to be a part of, and it's absolutely extraordinary, the locations we're in and the size of the actual production and how many people are involved, all the background artists, all the scenes, the sets. It's extraordinary to be a part of, and I'm an actor, but I'm still very impressed by walking into these incredible buildings and places that I haven't seen before. It sort of imbues you with sort of qualities that if you were on a soundstage you wouldn't necessarily get. I mean, these are real buildings, and people have been here for a long time, and the machinations that we're describing have been happening here for a long time. It's great that a sort of company like Shondaland has taken this as the basis for one of their programs. It's fantastic to be a part of that. What a great thing to do is take something that people think they know about and make it contemporary and make it relevant and show that the themes that have been explored by Shakespeare and many others in the past are still deeply relevant. This isn't just a love story. It has really kind of quite serious political implications, and the machinations that are going on in late 1500s Verona that Shakespeare was talking about are still very relevant today. And I'm very pleased that Shondaland has decided to use that as the basis for one of their programs, and obviously we hope it's as successful as all the rest of them. So I'm very happy to be a part of it.
I play the nurse who Shakespeare calls Juliet's nurse, but Shondaland calls the nurse. And she is a wonderful character who is connected because of her relationship with House Capulet, which came through Lady Capulet. She comes from a tough background, probably the countryside, and she was a wet nurse. She breastfed both Lady Capulet and then her daughter Juliet. So she is the sort of surrogate mother to House Capulet, and she knows the secrets. The nurse had a daughter, Susan. It's never referred to in our show, but it's referred to in Shakespeare, and I've believed that is how she comes to be a wet nurse. And she would have been the same age as Lady Capulet, but then through various circumstances she becomes wet nurse to Juliet. And Juliet is the apple of her eye, her adored darling. And she realizes, because she's practical, she's a tough cookie, this woman, that actually, for very good practical reasons, actually Juliet should marry a Montague. A Capulet should marry a Montague, even though it goes against the grain for her. And so she secretly allows this to happen against what Lady Capulet, or indeed Lord Capulet, might think. And she's excited by Romeo. But he is a Montague, so she will never show it. And she adores the fact that Juliet has fallen in love for the first time. And she thinks it should go ahead. She's all for young love. This is such a wonderful what if. This is what the story is about. What if, after Romeo and Juliet die, the Montagues and Capulets sort it out? I think the premise of the idea is going to, set on fire anyone's imagination who knows the play of Romeo and Juliet. And even if they don't, nowadays there's so many terrible, what would you call them, fights between people, between gangs. This is what will speak to, I think, a modern audience. It's not just set in the olden days. I'll go full circle. We're shooting here in a most remarkable town in Spain called Cáceres. And I've spent now nearly 4 months here wandering, walking every inch of it. It's a small town, it's in the middle of Spain. And I have noticed that in the 14th and 15th century, this town was peopled by Moors, Jews, Arabs, Christians. They all lived together. This is in the middle of nowhere. This is in the center of Europe. And it's the same with Italy. If you take a port, there would be Moors, Jews, Arabs, Christians, this whole melange, this whole wonderful mixture of people. And I think for the first time, our project is going to show a Shakespearean story, if you like, a story from the 16th century, with its right mixture of people, with its diversity. And I think that's one of the most thrilling things about this story. And don't let anybody tell you everyone was fair-skinned and blue-eyed in Shakespeare's day. No, the Prince of Aragon, the Prince of Morocco, Othello was a Moor. Here we have it. Here we have the juiciness of it all. It's wonderful. What's extraordinary is when you're waiting for a shot, usually you're stuck in some terrible old, room round the back of somewhere. And here, for instance, in the Capulet house, it's the most beautiful cloister where I sit on my chair waiting. And it really does feed into your imagination. It's the most incredible privilege, really. I've been at it quite a long time, and this is the most beautiful place I've ever been to work in. Extraordinary.